Fisher. I'm a toxicologist with the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the role of DHHS with these site investigations and talk about some of the human health outcomes associated with PFAS exposure. So the role of DHHS along with the local health department is to understand the unique concerns in your community. And we work to develop a plan to investigate and address any health risks in your community. So EGLE is the State Department that's usually leading the investigation. They're usually the ones collecting the data. And then DHHS, along with local health, is looking at that data and making determinations or recommendations on what needs to be done to protect public health. So as Heidi showed, there's a lot of products that contain PFAS, which means there's a lot of different ways that we can be exposed to PFAS. And the main pathway of concern is through ingestion, mainly through drinking water. So any way that you're somehow swallowing PFAS. So drinking water pathway is of most concern, but it also includes eating fish that are caught in water bodies that are contaminated with PFAS. We do have fish consumption guidelines for different water bodies across the state, which sometimes PFAS is the chemical that is driving those fish consumption guidelines. Some other ways that we can be exposed include accidentally swallowing soil or dirt. For example, if you're gardening in soil that contains PFAS and then you forget to wash your hands, you take a bite of your sandwich, that's another way that PFAS can enter your body. And then eating foods that are packaged in materials that contain PFAS. Again, some of those like fast food wrappers or pizza boxes, anything that has like a grease repellent contains some kind of PFAS on it. And then use of consumer products as well. And so these are all through the ingestion pathway. PFAS absorption through the skin is typically not a concern. So this is a graph that shows blood levels of 4 of the most common PFAS that are found in our blood. And this is from the years 2000 to 2018. And in the early 2000s, US manufacturers phased out the use of PFOS and PFOA. And you can see that reflected, especially on this top line. This is for PFOS. So there's been a pretty good decrease in the levels of PFOS in our blood over the past 20 years. And US manufacturers are no longer using PFOS and PFOA. They are, however, using some other PFAS. We don't have as much toxicological information about those replacement PFAS that they're using, but the science continues to come out, and we look at that information as it comes out to determine if we can provide health recommendations for those other PFAS. So there are some human health outcomes that are associated with high exposure to PFAS. We have the most toxicological information about 2 specific kinds of PFAS, PFOA and PFOS. So these are some of the health outcomes associated with high exposure to those, and they include reduced fertility, high blood pressure in pregnant women or preeclampsia, small decreases in infant birth weight, and higher cholesterol, especially total and LDL, as well as thyroid disease, liver damage, decreased immune system response to vaccines. That one's getting particular attention from the EPA right now. And then for high exposure to PFOA, developing certain types of cancer, specifically kidney and testicular cancer. And it's just important to note that there are a lot of factors that go into the development of these diseases. So this just means that someone who has had high exposure to these PFAS compounds are more likely to develop these health outcomes than someone who has not had that high exposure. So when we're looking at data, we're looking at multiple lines of evidence, looking at multiple lines of consideration when we're determining how we're going to protect public health. So I'm going to talk about each of these bullet points in the next slides, but we look at what we have, we call comparison values. We look at residential well results, both on an individual basis and a collective basis, and then we look at site-specific information as well. So the comparison values are basically health-based screening values that we use to determine, The comparison values are screening values that are set to protect everyone. So they're health-based, they protect the most sensitive populations, which for PFAS include fetuses and breastfed babies. So these are our comparison values. They're very similar to the values that Heidi showed during her slides. The only difference is for PFOS, we have a comparison value of 8 parts per trillion. Currently, the groundwater cleanup criteria that EGLE uses in their Part 201 program is 16 parts per trillion. The other thing we look at is if there are residential wells in the area. A lot of times we'll go out and sample those wells for PFAS, and we look at those results both on an individual basis. So if your well was sampled, we're looking to see if your results exceeded any of the comparison values. In those cases, we will offer or recommend a point of use filter that's certified for PFAS reduction. Sometimes we get into different scenarios where we have this house that maybe has some detections but no exceedances of the comparison values, and it's surrounded by homes that don't have any detections of PFAS. If we don't have any other site-specific information that's giving us pause, or there's no gaps in the data, we may determine that home in the middle doesn't need a recommendation on the filter. However, if we have the same house, again, detections of PFAS but no exceedances of the comparison values, but it's surrounded by homes that do exceed, then we're probably going to offer that home in the middle a filter. The other scenario that's not really seen here is sometimes we don't have many houses in the area, or we don't have a lot of information about the site, and in those cases we may just, as a precautionary measure, just offer a filter to that home until we get more information. And we also rely on site-specific information. This is usually collected by EGLE or other agencies. We want to know if there's a known source in the area or a potential source in the area that can give us information on, when PFAS may have been used, where that, groundwater plume may be. We're also looking at the geology of the area. So how deep is your well? Typically, and this is true for most contaminants, shallower wells more prone to contamination issues than a deeper well. And then what does the ground look like? Is it mostly sand where contaminants can move through fairly quickly? Are there clay layers that may prevent contamination from moving further down into the aquifer? And then if there is a known groundwater plume, we want to know which direction groundwater is flowing, because that may tell us that we need to sample other homes in the area. It may tell us where we need to continue the investigation. If we do recommend a filter, we do offer filters that have this NSF/ANSI standard 53 for PFOA and PFOS reduction. Those are the 2 PFAS that are currently certified through NSF and ANSI. And then as always, just make sure you're following the manufacturer's instructions to make sure that your filter is working properly, you're changing the cartridges in a timely manner, all that. So if we're looking at the area and we've got all this information, we may decide that there's no public health actions that are necessary. Maybe we sampled all the residential wells in the area and they all came back non-detect. In that case, we wouldn't be recommending filters. However, in some of the scenarios that I talked about before, we may recommend a filter that they're not meant to be a permanent solution, they're an interim solution. It gives us the opportunity to protect your health while the investigation is ongoing. And then we always provide educational material, so if your residential well is sampled, we'll provide you with a results letter. It'll contain educational material. In that results letter, we have an array of fact sheets and educational materials as well that we bring to these events, so please feel free to take anything you want. And then I wanted to finish up talking a little bit about our fish consumption guidelines. This is called the Eat Safe Fish program. And we do have, I know Duck Lake is the closest water body to this area. Fish were collected from Duck Lake. We don't have the results back yet, so we are recommending to use the statewide guidelines, which are meant for water bodies where we don't have fish data from currently. And yeah, so it looks like they're going, Eagles Water Resources Division is going to collect fish out of Duck Lake next field season. Fish have been collected out of White Lake, it looks like in 2017 and 2023. Based on the levels that were found, PFAS is not the contaminant driving the fish consumption guidelines for fish out of White Lake. And then in 2021, pumpkin seeds were collected from the Pearson Drain, and based on the levels of PFOS that were found in those fish, we do have a fish consumption guideline for bluegill and any other sunfish species of 2 meals per month. And with that, I'll turn it over to Matt.